go. Episode 6. Got Coach Marco, Coach Joe. All right, we're going to rock it for you today. We're going to continue where we were from last week in terms of talking about the idea of non-negotiables, but now applying this idea of creating new habits or just being aware of your habits when it applies to your physical movement, to the things that you do on a day-to-day basis at CrossFit MFP or whatever program that you follow if you're not a member. So let's get grounded, let's get organized, and then we'll get right into our flow. So it's all get grounded, relax shoulders, relax the face. Wherever you are, just take a moment to slow down, be present. Just fix your awareness only on yourself, this present moment. And let's shift our awareness. Notice what's happening in your body. What kind of movement are you applying right now? Maybe it's the simple act of being aware of placing your feet fully on the ground. Maybe it's being aware of keeping your shoulders down and back and lengthening your spine. Maybe it's being aware of where your head is positioned, or you may be tilting your head back, or you're tucking your chin or looking down. And just bring that awareness to being in as best of a posture position as you can. Sitting tall, head is neutral, shoulders relax. Now just let everything sink. Your shoulders, your hands, just release any physical tension. Let's take our 3 breaths. Deep inhale to the nose. Hold. When I say exhale, just let all that physical tension ease. Go ahead, exhale. Deep inhale. Hold. Big exhale. For our last breath, just notice any shifts into the physical body. One breath in. Hold. And big exhale. All right. Let's open the eyes there and just using that practice here to really just being aware of what happens to your movement in your body when we do a simple practice like that. And we'll continue that on as we flow through this podcast. So, Coach Joe, what do we got here for our quote of the day?
Yeah, I have a very short, but I think powerful quote. I heard it from Andrew Huberman the other day, and it's just that fear is a sensation and courage is a decision. So, I think, as we're just kind of talking a lot about awareness, just being aware of things, one of those things you might be aware of many times is fear, and just like recognizing that fear, it's not fun, but it is like, it's a feeling, it's a sensation. And then like what you choose to do about it really is just the determining factor of, how you really reflect who you are. So nice little short and sweet.
Yeah. I love that because, I think fear has a reputation of being known as false evidence. To some extent that might be true, but fear actually I categorize as like real evidence because it is a necessary emotion for us to process. And sometimes fear gets put into, a bad category because it's, it causes discomfort and causes maybe a negative reaction. But fear is also our best ally to allow us to grow in so many ways. So how do we start to apply that maybe to our mindful movement and our stuff that we do at the gym?
Yeah.
Well, let's find out. Well, first thing is, before we get into that, let's give you guys a recap, right? We are in our 3rd week of summer programming. So what does that mean? We are going through again a 3 week cycle of themes, movements, progressions of things that we want to work on. And after this third week, so we're in that third week, we are going to recycle back starting next week on our progressions of our movement. So, for example, the very first week, we worked on day one, we worked on the rings. On Monday, we did Cossack squats. Tuesday, we did a form of deadlift. On Wednesday, we did some sort of Olympic lift with going overhead. Friday, and then we had all those Metcons or Part Bs or accessories and the cash outs that are going to continue to move on, just with a little variety there or changing of the reps. So just kind of be prepared for that. This week we'll finish our third cycle, and yeah, just continue to keep showing up. We know summer is a rough time for people with traveling, and that's totally fine, right? So whenever you get in, that's the idea with the summer programming is it gives you a little bit more flexibility to at least participate in one of those 3 weeks, even as you guys travel their summer. So we'll see this continuation of the 3 week cycle two more times, right? So and then I'll go all the way to September. So I think a lot of us are having fun with it. I think we're seeing some progress, and so yeah, just keep an open mind as we
Yeah.
are exploring that. Joe, anything about the summer programming so far that
Yeah, one
comes to
just
mind?
well, I'm really enjoying it. I really like the 4 time Fridays. Like it's been fun to see like kind of old school vibes, like cheering people on as they're
Mm,
trying to finish last couple of reps, last couple of movements, and I've also just been enjoying testing like sort of our versions of standardized workouts on Wednesdays. So it's just
mm,
like it's nice to have these consistent tests. And last thing I'll say is like if you are traveling and you have any questions about like how to modify on the
yeah.
road, just like shoot us an email, and we could help because always try to stay moving. I mean, if it makes you feel good, like I love when I'm on vacation, I like to move just because when I'm on vacation, I like to do what makes me feel good, and
Mm.
moving makes me feel good.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, definitely keep us in the loop, guys. Don't hesitate to reach out. Um, and also, yeah, I actually went down to like a rabbit hole the other day of finding some benchmarks to implement in the summer programming during the week. We did the Chief last week. Everybody loves that workout because it's so simple, so effective, and
Hmm.
it brings that like CrossFit intensity that like feels so good.
Yeah,
So you will expect some things. I went down a deep rabbit hole of really looking into some old benchmark workouts. So you'll see some of those sprinkle in for sure, to give us some opportunity to work that intensity that CrossFit brings. So all right, and then yeah, for some of those who experienced over the past few weeks the introduction to cold exposure to the community. Again, if many of you have followed my journey of really diving deep into cold plunging and the ice exposure, and yeah, I mean we know it works. We know there's benefits, and so we have Park, who has come into our community from Mind Over Matter Wellness to provide you guys actually like office hours to plunge with him. Just one thing to communicate with you guys is that these will be paid plunging sessions. So you're almost getting like a personal plunge session with Park. That'll be $20 fee for 3 to 5 minutes of however long you're going to stay in the cold plunge with some guided breath work and tips from Park that'll be helpful. And then yeah, stay tuned for more opportunities with Park. We're going to have another workshop in July, at the end of July, but it'll be a 4 pillars workshop with Park. We just finished a workshop this past weekend with Dr. Chris Live that was amazing, and we'll see a continuation on that series as well. And yeah, just stay updated with the Mindful Mobility class with Coach Joe. We have that Thursdays at 7:30 and 5. And then, our Sunday specials are really just a great opportunity for people that, want to maybe take a day to continue to move, but something that's not going to, you know, cause any implications with continuing throughout the weekly programming.
yeah.
So the run club, you can take that as it is. You can go hard, you can go slow, active recovery, it's a big thing. And, boot camp or the breath work class that I have, they're all great additions to continue on. So do you have anything for mindful mobility or run club?
Well, mindful mobility, I've really appreciated members showing up for it. Like it's been a lot of fun to coach it, and
Mm,
I'm really just like enjoying it myself, like learning about my own movement patterns as I'm even coaching it, and kind of demoing movements, and I just encourage you to give it a shot. Like just the act of being aware how you move is really important. And sometimes, like especially with CrossFit, when you're trying to move fast, which is moving fast is good sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to have that balance of like just noticing how you move and like getting into your body. And like there's a lot of magic to just realizing like when you put a lot of like attention and effort into very simple foundational things like we've kind of experienced with Dr. Chris Live on at the workshop on Saturday. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. Like we were just walking on
Mm-hmm.
Saturday, and like so that workshop gave me some good inspiration for Thursdays. So but yeah, like
Yes.
just attention really is a lot of it's effort.
Yeah. No, I love it, and I participated in the mindful mobility. We'll touch a little bit more about that actually at the end because Joe's. That's actually a good segue for us to really move into our topic for today, which is creating movement habits or these non-negotiables for you to stay accountable to, like understanding what movement means to you and how you can reframe your mindset of looking at movement for ways that enhance your performance, that allow you to live longer, that allow you to do things a little bit more effectively on your day-to-day basis. And obviously, if you've taken any of our classes at the gym, and for those who've been to many of my classes, you know that the word just comes out of my mouth of like creating a good habit for your movement. Like I talk about that all the time, and specifically what that looks like when we apply that to certain exercises that you learn at MFP. So, I think the first thing that we want to talk about or just like reflect on is, for you, just ask this question to yourself, how does creating good movement habits or patterns relate to your relationship to physical activity? I'm not going to say fitness. I'm going to just use the word physical activity. And if you're really not sure like what that means, just start looking at, you know, or be more mindful of how your body moves when you're in class. And like that's why your class is so important, or just in general. I mean, we do it every class, but like we're always trying to have you guys think about your movement and how you do it in a way for you to learn more about yourself and what's actually sustainable for you long term, to obviously little things of like not getting injured,
Yeah.
right, doing this safely and effectively.
Yeah, one thing that comes to my mind when I think about movement patterns and habits and like the way we move at the gym. I think back actually to when I did my L2,
Mm,
and we were just really breaking down like just foundational movements, front squat, deadlift, and one of the biggest things with front squat, especially the front rack, was or getting below parallel. So let's say front squat, two range of motion limitations: one are front rack, and two getting below parallel.
mm,
And it's so easy for a member or even a coach to just say like, oh, like that's a mobility issue. But one of the things that really stood out for my L2 was saying like, is it a mobility issue, or do you just have to try a little harder?
mm,
And like, I found that, a lot of times members really could like, when they really pay attention, like, I want to say try a little harder, but I don't really like that term as much as saying like pay more attention, because like certain movement patterns, like we kind of sell ourselves short.
right.
And I think that like, certainly limitations are a real thing, but like when it comes to how we move, I think it's really important to really just like pay as close attention and go that extra mile. Like don't be first, like don't have the first thing to blame as being like range of motion, because we all have our own
Mm.
limitations.
Yeah, and I think that's something to be aware of when we start to break down this idea of like what are non-negotiables when it comes to physical activity or movement or limitations. I think the first thing we want to look at is like what do we actually know, let's just say quote unquote via science, that applies to the human body and the human structure. So if we just start with anatomy,
Mm-hmm.
just start with the concept of anatomy. So probably most of you have never taken like anatomy, haven't taken an anatomy class, but you can probably understand some of the basics, right? We have a shin bone that connects to the thigh bone, it goes to the hip bone. I don't know what that song is. You got the spine, you got
Yeah.
the pelvis. We have all these things, right? We have a humerus that goes into a shoulder girdle. We have all these things. We have the spine, we have all the phalanges and the digits. But these are all bones, right? And so something to be aware of is that we know that bones have a general structure. Like if I held up a skeleton, right, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, like in a class or whatever, we know that the knees will lift up, the ankles, the knee joint will bend, the ankle joint will bend, the elbow joint will bend, and all those things. The one thing that the skeleton doesn't represent is actually the fluidity in the spine. Because like a skeleton structure
Yeah.
is like it's a stiff spine.
Yeah.
That's not actually how a spine works. A spine is actually one of the most um, varied structures in your body that has the most ability to move. I think that's one of the things that a lot of us get mistaken for that we teach at MFP. But there's some things we know via anatomy. We have bones in certain places that move certain directions due to the musculoskeletal system or the muscular system. So we know that all the muscles and tendons and ligaments that attach the bones to the muscle and to the joints, they all have certain responsibilities, right? We know that if you're familiar with, physiology and biomechanics, which are basically saying that we know that the knee can do this, we know that the knee can do that, we know that the hip and shoulder we talk about when we do cars,
Yeah.
controlled articular rotations, they're ball and socket joints that move in these ranges of motions, and so on and so forth. So we do have some of these basic understandings. That's from my background, let's just say in exercise science and things that we learn that are non-negotiables with how the human body physically operates. But with that said is, I kind of just maybe lost some of you there. Basically what we're saying is we have some standards to, how the body works, how we can do things. But there's still so much that we don't know when it comes to physical and human potential, to what the body can tolerate, what the actual limitations actually are, and how we can progress through some of these things. Because we have the muscular system attached to the skeletal system that has so much other ways to explore movement that isn't just kind of like in a
Yeah.
box. Um, so the real thing is like, how do we, explore that more, right? When it comes to habits that make us feel like we aren't limited, but we can understand maybe like where we are at with, our movement patterns and how we can apply that to some of the things that we learned at the gym.
Yeah, and I think a big component to it is like exploring and playing. Like there are certain movements like that we do, like where there are like true standards, like deadlift. Like we want to make sure we're owning our positions, but there's plenty of ways that we can move our bodies like in the gym and outside of it to just like explore and play. And I think explore and play is something that we advocate for it, but I think it's kind of lost in our society, especially like especially for adults. Like even at home, just like spending time on the floor and like exploring different ways to move and hold your body. Like, and it's important to know that you're not gonna break, and that's something you've mentioned before, like that broken glass mentality. Like knowing that like you're pretty resilient. Your body's meant to move. Your spine's meant to twist. Like you're not gonna break. Like
Mm-hmm.
feel confident to play around a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the biggest things. And so, like, how do we create this idea of a non-negotiable for a movement that allows you to, again, explore all aspects of life? But like, one of the things I want you to think about is, do these non-negotiables, these movement habits that you develop, do they actually make you fit? And I think that's something I kind of want to bring up, because if this might be helpful for most of you that aren't really sure, like, what does CrossFit even, like, what is CrossFit even to begin with? And CrossFit is a fitness methodology, and CrossFit is probably the only methodology out there that actually tries to define what being fit means. And being fit is, in their words, work capacity across broad time and modal domains, or constantly varied functional movement at high intensity. And what that means is it's basically having the ability to express your fitness in a variety of ways, express your movement in a variety of ways. Now, that doesn't necessarily, um, translate to movement habits, but your movement habits and your movement efficiency play a role into like how fit you can actually be. But it doesn't necessarily, fitness doesn't also always mean, longevity, and movement habits don't necessarily always mean, you're going to be the most fit. So I just want to kind of leave that as an open-ended thing of like, well, how do my, movement habits that I learned in the gym, how do they actually apply to like making me more fit and vice versa?
Yeah, think of fitness not just like when you're moving. Think of fitness when you're sitting. Like even for me, like right now I'm sitting. Like when I start to get fatigued, I'll want to I'll slouch a little bit, or I'll want to like rest my elbows. Like your endurance is more than like we talked about run
Mm-hmm.
club earlier. Mentioned like endurance capacity. Like endurance is just holding your positionings. Like when you're
Yeah.
at work, when you're home, when you're walking the dogs. Like fitness is like I think just it's really important to expand your horizon of fitness to just even being sedentary, like
Mm-hmm.
being sedentary, there are acts of fitness that you're doing and you don't even really realize it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think, well, that's actually a perfect segue into like what we learned this past weekend. So this past weekend we had our longevity workshop with Dr. Chris Lieb, and the basis of the initial workshop was to how do we apply aspects of movement or movement habits or creating non-negotiables to a sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because in reality, in our culture, and a lot of us, like we live um, lifestyles that where we are, maybe sitting a lot of the time or just not being active outside that 1 hour. And I think for a lot of people, that might cause some other dysfunctions in their movement patterns. We, like Chris said, like we don't want to necessarily put sitting on a, it's the worst thing in the world pedestal,
Yeah.
but we know that we develop, poor habits or poor limitations due to, maybe not applying movement to just like when we're at home or when we're just doing our day-to-day activities, because again, we're not doing jobs that are requiring us to do that.
Yeah, and even if you are doing a job that where you work with your hands too, like it's easier for that to become harmful, like sitting as well. Like if
Yeah.
you're, like for example, like my grandmother, God bless her, she was on her hands all the time, and like her knees are all messed up now just from like poor posture. Like so, whether you are, it's relatable to like literally every walk of life. Whether you're a desk worker, whether you do work with your hands, whether you drive for a living, whether you're always in the car at the office, whether you're a doctor, like these movement patterns are really important, and I think you know being aware of that is the most important thing, and just being willing to really embrace this lifestyle of fitness, and knowing that like it is just so much more than showing up to the gym, even though that's an important part, but it's just that's the tip of like that's like the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like a few parallels that kind of work with what you were just talking about. For example, like I know a lot of individuals that work as like contractors or people
Mm,
that are literally like having to be in like kneeling positions all the time, like sitting their hips to their heels, or like kind of maneuvering their bodies or picking things up and moving them around. Like they play very active jobs on a day to day basis, and they have like good mobility and all these things, but they obviously maybe are lacking, foundations of fitness, cardiovascular health, strength, stamina,
mm-hmm.
coordination, maybe because it's all they do. And then we have like people that maybe do all those fitness based components in the gym, but then they come home and they work at a desk all day where they create movement limitations because maybe they're hunched over a lot of the time, or
Yep.
maybe because their hips are always in a closed position by sitting in a chair. And so they start to, tighten things up where that starts to show when they come to the gym and they try to apply, uh, you know, their ankle, knee, and hip flexion when they
Yeah.
squat. So I think it goes both ways, but the enlightening thing about the workshop this past weekend was that Chris was really giving us like a open background to just think differently about like how we can actually create non-negotiables or movement habits into our daily lifestyle that's or sedentary or non or movements that we're do every single day that don't require like actual fitness per se.
Yeah.
Like, so for example, when we're at home, instead of like for what Joe and I are doing, maybe next week instead of sitting on chairs, like we'll be sitting on the ground,
Yeah.
right? Literally like exploring the floor. And like one of the concepts was consistency with Chris. So like maybe every 2 minutes for 20 minutes that you sit, you go to the ground and you explore a different position of sitting on the floor. And I don't know if anyone has seen the documentary on like Netflix about like living to in your 100, the Blue Zone documentary. And this is something Chris pulled up, and it's also in Chris's book, is that a lot of cultures for people that do have higher lifespans, they are spending a lot of time like being in different positions throughout their daily life. And that could be sitting, or that could be something very simple as like walking more, right? And that's something we actually touched on in the workshop, like the idea of like how to be more mindful of applying a different or an efficient gait pattern when you walk that is actually allowing you to like balance on one side, getting the proper foot and ankle flexion when you land on the other side, and so on and so forth. So I think it was really a great workshop for us to like think differently about how we can apply habits to our day-to-day life that aren't necessarily fitness related, but they're important for longevity, lifespan related.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could just like expand your definition of fitness too. Like fitness is the way you live your life. Like just think of it like living in practice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, you know, carrying like what we learn like especially at the gym or like Chris's workshop, like when we're really trying to be mindful of the way we move, like just I think the best approach is applying that to like no matter what your daily life consists of, just applying that to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not like that's the reason functional fitness is meant to apply to literally all aspects of life.
Yeah.
So just think of it that way. Even if you do, you could be that weird guy in the office who brings a rock mat or
Yeah.
do something, like because it's you got to kind of break the norm a little bit too, because like society is this type of work is not super widespread among society, and like if you want to, even if you do work in office and you don't work from home, like
Mm-hmm.
get a little weird. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we actually think is weird is actually very normal. I think I
Exactly.
think that's I think
Exactly.
that's actually one of my pet peeves with a lot of the way people think in general. It doesn't have to necessarily be our society, but everything's very like influenced. Like you said, we talked about this last week about like how our nervous system is constantly being fed so many things, and if we just apply this to like movement culture, you could easily go online or Google or look something up based on something, and you get so many different things when it comes to like fear mongering about
Hmm.
don't do this exercise, do this, or this is right, this is wrong. And like you were saying, like it's more about like where do we give ourselves room to really explore, because I also said like at the very beginning there's still so many things like that the human body is capable of that we still don't know. And I know there are so many things that we do know based on science, the Hubermans of the world and all these
Yeah.
things, but in reality, like we have so much potential with our body. But like, yeah, how do we also become more mindful of where I may be limited with some ranges of motions and some things with my mobility, but how can I take this in a way of what are some of these things that I can apply with my habits and my daily day-to-day activities to uh, improve those, right? And really think about like what does this physical potential look like, and yeah, like we can question like what is really fitness, and I think that's a fair thing to do, but I also think too that we do know that there are some things to be standardized when it comes to being fit, like having these things to explore with as much variety as possible. But I also think it's a great way to think about like, well, being fit is like being able to do what you're meant to do. So
Yeah.
if all you need to do is sit at a computer all day, and being fit for you is just sitting at a computer all day, so that's fit
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, and I think a good piece of advice is try to avoid, like you were saying, like anybody who says don't do this. Like, for years, I mean, Marco, is like a fitness professional for a long time. Like there are so many people who like were saying, tracking your knees over your toes is a bad idea.
Right.
And like it's just, quite the opposite. Like it's so good for you, like your VMO, your quads, like knee, like long-term health and strength and stability, your ankles. I mean, there's old school people who don't want you squatting below parallel. So if anyone like, I like to take advice from people who tell me to try things in the space rather than to say to restrict. Restriction typically, like restriction is very rarely your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Just have this openness towards movement. Sometimes it's important that we like have a neutral spine. Sometimes it's important to curve our spine. Like, be open to all movement patterns and try not to be dogmatic about it, because people just love to get dogmatic about everything,
Mm-hmm.
fitness, diet, everything. It's like just try get it, and that's what we like. That's what makes MFP so different. Is like, and different than a lot of CrossFit gyms, is we just we do a lot of non-traditional stuff. We
Yeah.
try new things.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's the best way to put it when it comes to like the dogmatic viewpoint. And um yeah, so like, yeah, I personally don't try to have a viewpoint of like, this exercise is bad, this is bad. There's still so many things I want to explore in other fitness realms and movement cultures that I'm very intrigued in, and I think it's like worth applying myself and exploring. And so that's one thing I really enjoyed about Chris a lot, is like, even as a physical therapist and someone who's like promoting CrossFit, where you might see a bunch of physical therapists talk poorly about CrossFit because they think people are going to get hurt, which is the complete opposite. And he's somebody that's been a reliable source. So just giving Chris a shout out in terms of how we want to treat our mindset towards movement in general. So, but let's continue on here. Let's segue into now uh, this example of how do we apply our topic, right? Creating non-negotiables, just things that are keeping us accountable to movement habits in general. So let's just talk about a non-negotiable in the CrossFit methodology per se. And one of the things we learned through the basic level one, and anyone can take a level one, by the way, is this idea of core to extremity with a lot of our exercises that we do. So basically saying that we want all the energy to initiate from the hips, the pelvis, the spine, and the shoulder girdle, right? Everything from here out to the arms, the limbs, and to the legs. So if we use something, for example, like a kettlebell swing, Joe's the master of saying, use your hips, all in the hips, right? Hips generate the force, and then the arms let guide the bell as it floats. And so really in a lot of things that we do in CrossFit, because a lot of our main exercises that we do are what we categorized in CrossFit as a functional movement, meaning a multi-joint complex movement, they do require you to be efficient in creating a habit of using your midline first as a tool to create energy into the extremities. So there's a lot of movements we do. I'm sure you could probably think about that. Like when you squat, the first thing you do is you move your hips. Even if I set myself up for a push-up, I engage my midline, right? I create a lot of tension in my midline before I descend. Or if I do a pull-up, before I even, scat, I create tension in my midline. If I'm doing a box jump, I move my hips and then I open my hips and then my knees pull up to my chest. So again, it's really applying to a lot of exercises we do. It's basically just saying that being aware of the whole midline positioning is very important to making a lot of your other movements making all of your movements really effective
Yeah.
than what you do at the gym.
Yeah, I mean that's your foundation, right? Like kind of think of it like a car. It's not like the wheels spin on the outside and then it all gets working on the engine inside. You know,
Right.
the engine's got a fire and that kind of just allows all those smaller pieces to like operate in harmony. So just really when you're approaching any movement, just be mindful of like what is like the true driving force here and like think about your body and just segment it in different pieces. Like, you know, and I think of that and that's just a good mindfulness practice in general, like
Mm,
looking at a movement, like a kettlebell swing, like you said, like, all right, where am I actually initiating this movement from? And it's my hips and like my arms are just, you know, kind of like a lever hanging on. But, you know, it's a good little practice to explore with every movement. You
mm,
know, think about that before, you know, today, box step ups, you know,
mm.
or, you know, like where are you initiating power from? Then just really getting into your body. It's a nice just little practice just to explore the overall structure of how you're moving.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that would be considered, like a non-negotiable in your movement patterns, right? So let's apply a non-negotiable we also use in CrossFit, and we'll use Fridays now in particularly, but like using a PVC pipe.
Yeah.
This idea of progressing movement, like that is non-negotiable, but it also teaches you the correct movement habits to do the movements correctly, mechanically speaking. So, and a lot of people, even still people that like have done CrossFit for a while, like they'll give me faces about using a PVC pipe, and actually more so the beginners might give a face about using a PVC pipe. Like, oh, why should I use this PVC pipe? Why should I use this 4 ounces when, yeah, it might feel quote unquote easier to use a weighted bar so that way you can get a feel of how you guide it. With that being said, if you cannot do it exactly how it's supposed to be done with 4 ounces, mechanically sound, quarter extremity, correct movement patterns, thinking about being mindful about every little component, then yeah, like that's a prerequisite. That is non-negotiable. Like you need to learn how to do it perfectly with 4 ounces before you want to do it with, X amount of pounds. And we do get, there's a lot of back and forth on that by like so many clients within CrossFit communities, and just in general, like even beginners, it baffles me. Are like, why do I need to use this? And obviously part of my job is like to explain like why
Yeah.
we want to use it, or why it's just like a valuable warm up tool. Like so many people, even in our gym, I see it all the time. Like you go through the motions with a PVC pipe. Like have you intentfully like tried to contract and feel every single little component of movement with a PVC pipe and actually translate that into doing it weighted? And I guarantee you every time it's effective. I've been doing this for a long time and I thoroughly look forward to using a PVC pipe.
Yeah, and if you do it right, like it's hard. Like if you especially like going to like different CrossFit seminars, like L1s, L2s, where you're just like locked in with a PVC pipe for like 30 straight minutes, like you're
Mm.
working, like just with no weight, just owning each position, like and being very mindful of the way you move. Like the PVC pipe could kind of put you through it. Like I think it's just a really helpful tool. One, it just like you know, it's also good for us just to, in general, like just take a step back and put the ego aside and really focus on moving the right way. And again, like if you are, like if you're going through the motions, you probably won't get anything out of it.
Yeah.
But if that's kind of up to you if you want to, you know, lock it in and you'll be working. PVC pipe could get you working.
Remember the level one, dude. We did so many
Yeah,
like PVC pipe squats, and
yeah,
I was like ridiculously sore after doing a
yeah,
level one.
yeah. Or like hardest one, honestly, is the front rack PVC.
Yeah, that's very
That's
harsh.
no joke.
Yeah,
No joke.
yeah, and I think it's just really honoring, progression.
Hmm.
No one's above somebody else to say that the very basics of making it look identical. Everything should look identical. I mean, we talk about that even with when it does become loaded. Does it from the PVC pipe look exactly the same as it does when you max out? Does that look identical? And if not, where did we lose the proper movement habits that apply to doing it well. So, how do we apply, movement habits into other movement progressions, for example? Let's just say one of the most popularized things you would see when you look up CrossFit or when CrossFit gets heat is, people doing like kipping pull-ups or just kipping anything. And there are non-negotiables when it actually comes down to learning skills and drills that are that complex. And you guys hear about it all the time at MFP, but it's like, can you one hang on the bar for a minute? And a movement habit when you hang on the bar is like, do you hook your thumb on? You have the crab claw. Now we say good versus bad, right? And then we want to have an open mind. Like, yeah, you could hang without your thumb. I'm not saying that's all, having a thumb on the bar is end all be all, but we try to teach that habit with an intent, right? Like what I'm trying to say is like, we want you to use your thumb due to the muscular engagement that happens when you wrap your thumb around the bar, that happens within the hand, the wrist, the forearm, the shoulder, and then the lat. So yeah, we intentionally create that habit for a reason, not saying that no thumb is the worst thing in the world, but we want to start with like hanging on a bar. Can you hang for a whole minute? Great. Can you do scapular pull-ups, 10 reps? Easy. Can you do strict pull-ups with good mechanics? A habit and pull-up is like we say, elbows to your ribs or scapula first, and then use the big bat wings. Like those are non-negotiables we want to have prior to learning a kip. Now we can teach you arch and hollow if you can hang for a minute, if you can do scap pull-ups, because that's actually good for your shoulder joint. But we want to think about like more dynamic power output, core to extremity with kipping. Yeah. And is that safe for you to do if you don't have, those prerequisites or those non-negotiables or habits prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it just like you got to learn to walk before you run. And,
yeah,
kipping is a great tool. I think that the people who, just go on the internet and slander kipping don't really understand its purpose.
Right.
It's like it has to be used intentfully and with the right purpose. And I will say, like, when you progress up to kipping, then the goal is to like really pay attention to how you're kipping. Like, are you initiating with your lats? Like, if you go through a high volume of kipping pull-ups, that next day, like in your lats, like you should be feeling like I'm always so sore. Like then making sure there's the next level of like progressing through making kipping properly. So
right.
Just honoring progressions is really important, and doing it the right way is just it has to be a non-negotiable. I think it's one of the most important things you can do.
Yeah. It still baffles me too, because like, I respect, our members for not understanding things, but like some people will look like, oh, I want to get a muscle up. I'm like, I want to learn that. Teach me, but like, you can't even do a ring dip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I have to laugh sometimes. I'm like, hard, thing to tell you, but like, you still got a long way to go. That's good. You think about like, I still have a journey ahead, and
that's fine.
yeah, and that's totally fine. I think we just gotta, again, like, what is your relationship to your movement? What is your relationship, like we talked about in the past few weeks, of progression, and yeah, and there's a lot of things can happen. Like, to do a deadlift, can you even like bend over and touch your toes? Like the prerequisite, the non-negotiable of maybe doing a deadlift, I've learned from other communities, but like, do you have the mobility in your hamstrings or to have the ability to like hinge your hips to do a deadlift? And again, this applies to like every single movement we do. Like, are there some prerequisites and habits that we can create prior to doing the sexy stuff?
Yeah.
And so just really kind of leaving that open for you guys, right? Just know that when we cue movements and we talk about, the progressions of the movement, again, sometimes it's, you're in a class and sometimes you can get lost, but, we're really teaching you these things for the idea of like, how can I translate these habits into a way that translate to my fitness? Because when you start to move efficiently and effectively, right, we start to create good standards, like just say for kipping, we'll come back to that, like a proper arch and hollow. And if you are doing like toes to bar or something and you're doing it with those beautiful positions, that has a direct relationship to your power output, like how much energy you're putting out for the movement, and that will relate to how you could potentially do more reps or more rounds when we do like a workout for time or a AMRAP or something like that. And so really know that like the better you move, the better habits that you have, that's going to directly translate into like how effectively or how fast you can move safely with the best awareness that you possibly can. And I've learned that, throughout my whole career of being in CrossFit and really putting an emphasis on like the people that move beautifully with the best form are those who are getting more work done
Yeah.
and more safely and effectively. You look at people that move sloppily, like if you're grabbing a wall ball and you're doing this and you're trying to throw that thing and just bringing it back down to your thighs and your chest, like you're working sloppy. You might be working harder because you're so sloppy, but you're also probably not accumulating as more reps as somebody who is moving effectively with good habits and positions, right? And being smooth and can save energy to do more work.
Yeah, I mean, think of capacity and fatigue in a way of like owning positions. Like,
Yeah.
when you're truly fatigued, like that's when even something as simple as an air squat, like a couple months ago when you're doing Murph, like true sign of fatigue isn't how hard you're breathing, isn't how much you're sweating. It's like, oh, like you can't really keep your torso upright, like you're hunched over as you're squatting. Like, that's true endurance is being able to do 100 air squats while still keeping like the integrity of positioning. So,
Mm-hmm.
think of like fatigue and endurance in a little bit of a different way and just kind of apply that to your movement, especially like if you feel like you're slowing down to move better, like try to reframe that and understand that keeping those like keeping that like those proper movement patterns are what's allowing you to keep that
Yeah,
consistency. Don't
100%.
get caught up in speed.
It's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, the endurance of positions is
Yeah.
key. And again, we work all this at the gym, right? So we're just kind of talking out loud of like the principles and things that we teach you guys. And so just like know like our thought process to all this, it's very deep and intentful of like, and we've applied that ourselves to how that affects actually your performance
Mm-hmm.
in your workouts that you do. So continuing on, we're almost done here. We just want to touch on, or at least I want to talk about one of my favorite acronyms. Okay. And again, everybody knows I'm an acronym person, but touching on this idea of like becoming a mindful mover. And this has always been a part of my philosophy at MFP from the very beginning is I've always been really trying to have people think more about their movement. And I get it. Sometimes you want to come into the gym and you don't want to think, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes, some of the longevity things that we do on Thursdays, it wants to be your active recovery day, but like I actually have you think so much about your movement because it has a neurological transfer. But there's just so much to be learned about the body that, again, we don't get to touch on from some of the basic things that we do in CrossFit. So, how do we start to create mindful based habits that expand our movement potential, our ability to do more, and expand our ability to absorb better movement habits? So this acronym that I made, athlete, right? Consider yourself, we're all athletes, regardless if you never played a sport, because essentially this term, this acronym has nothing to do with a sport per se. And I think we have to maybe shift this and reframe this idea of like being an athlete doesn't necessarily mean you have to play a sport. Being an athlete is more of a way of being when it comes to physical activities. So, athlete, always thinking, having learned effort towards everything. So, really, the idea of being an athlete, and even this is how I apply it to individuals that do play sports and apply that to activities that would get the stigma of being an athlete. But in general, it's about the best movers are the people that are constantly aware and thinking about their movement and being curious about their movement. And also, I don't want to don't think about effort, right? Having learned effort. Effort isn't necessarily going harder. Effort is just the process of bringing awareness to
Mm-hmm.
something, right? It's the idea of like noticing that, oh, this body part moves like this. Oh, this body part feels like this when I go apply that to my movement, and that that equals attention. And so once you apply this idea of thinking towards your movement, effort towards your movement, um, we want to that actually translates to like everything in our life, and so it actually becomes a very holistic way of creating good non-negotiables and movement habits to yourself, being a more mindful individual when you're into the gym, and then how does that apply to how you think and apply mindfulness to everything outside of the gym.
Yeah, and I think for the mindful movement and mindful mobility flows, like really think about effort in that space. Not doing as many burpees as you can in 2 minutes, but rather just like paying as close attention to everything, core to extremity, the way your foot lands when you walk, the way you have your knee kind of leaning past your foot on when you step up, just like
Mm.
these little things that you might be a little bit mindless towards as you're moving through quickly, and that's understandable. But just explore what that effort looks like, and most importantly, like what it feels like,
Yeah,
because I think it's a really important stimulus to achieve.
yeah. And look, I know it's easier said than done, right? Like I know, I'm just a very intense thinker when it comes to being in the gym. I've been trained and hardwired to be a mindful mover all the time, but know like the more of a thinking athlete you can become, it actually is going to translate to your performance. It's going to translate to your power output. It's going to translate to like how efficiently you can do the move. It's going to translate to you improving your strength. And so if like we apply that to like what are we doing right now in the summer programming, kind of wrap this up, when we do things with tempo, this has always been a day one thing at MFP. Everybody's like, oh, tempo this, tempo that, but tempo is the best way to create long-term and sustainable strength, mobility, elasticity in your joints and your tendons and your ligaments. Just get you ridiculously strong, but also really have you think and be aware of non-negotiables, like
Hmm.
movement habits that you should be applying that allow you to do these movements effectively, safely, and efficiently. Uh, we do our accessory movements, like the weird non-traditional stuff that you see a lot out at MFP. Like today, the weight it dislocates. One of the best things you can do is like creating that habit of like gripping and pulling. And then as you come back, right, are you aware of like where that sticking point is? And then how do I create a habit of creating tension through that sticking point as I come back, right? So like just it happens with every single little thing that we do. Um, and so just really know that, when we apply it to like the Metcons and even moving fast in the MRAPs, like you still want to work on those things,
Yeah.
right? It's not just like, oh, we do it in part A and then just like throw it out the window in part B. Those things are still important to be mechanically sound so that you guys can just continue to be awesome athletes and make performance gains.
Yeah, defined a good relationship with those sticking points, and those imbalances are totally normal in the human body, and like when you notice one side is a little more wobbly, like that's just an
Yeah,
opportunity just to move slower, be more patient, be more a little bit more mindful. So yeah, I mean that's I think it's relevant for literally every person, every fitness level. Like there's not a single person without a restriction.
yeah, yeah. There's so many things that could even be translated, like a non-negotiable for anytime, like when we're on our hands. Like I talk about, like, do you spread your fingers out? Do you turn your hands like slightly external? Do you create tension into the floor?
Mm.
Right? And then there's things like we can contradict. We talk about like squats, for example. We always say like hips move first. Like, yeah, if we're doing like a heavy weighted back squat or front squat, you usually will tell you to do that. But there's times where it's okay to create a movement habit through like bending your knees first, like a
Yeah.
cyclist squat. So like that's kind of like how we're all blending this together with being just open minded to creating movement habits in other areas that all create a holistic approach to our potential in our bodies that allow us to be, more functional human beings.
Yeah.
So, the sky's the limit here. And again, we just kind of talked a lot about just like some generals. Again, that's kind of usually what we do, but it's really more about to create curiosity for you guys and to create more of like an open mind to our thought processes when it comes to developing a program, a program, a way of being. And I've seen so many different um, types of people come into the gym, and I've had like people that have done yoga who have all these wonderful mobility components to how they move it, like they lack so much stability. And I've had power lifters that have come in and they have so much stability, but they have like no mobility or body awareness. And so we're using all these as tools for you to again create the model that CrossFit creates, which is again a balanced program. So how do we always come back to finding balance? How do we come back to treating our bodies and looking at our physical potential from a different perspective? So let's wrap this up. Joe, do you want to touch on it? So we talked a lot about like mindful movement and habits. So you want to touch on any last things with your class? I know that's really a good class to start with, to really maybe start to put some of these things together of like being less in your head, but also being into your body and combining both of those.
Yeah, I think that it's really a perfect pair for the rest of the work we're doing, like throughout our summer programming, throughout any different programming cycle. And my advice is to, think about mindful mobility and the way we move on Thursdays in conjunction with the rest of the week. Obviously, there's certainly a time and place to, pick up the pace, but, you're still being mindful that you're going faster. Like just having a full, like widespread mindset of being a mindful mover. I think you'll really get those foundations in the class. And I think that, for some of us, it'll be second nature. And for some of us, it's going to be a little bit completely different. So just come give it a shot, and then just, use that, like we were saying earlier today, like what you do in class is relevant to everything. Like apply that to the rest of your classes, apply that to the rest of your life. Just the more mindfully you move, the more efficiently you move, the better you move. And eventually, like for overall longevity, it's kind of it's the most direct path to like feeling strong in every aspect of your life, I would say.
Love it. 10. All right. See you guys at the class. Let's wrap this up. Right. So that's about our topic for today. We talked your ears off here. Hopefully you guys stayed for the end. Obviously, come on now, guys, you got to listen. All right. We know we talk, but listen, it's all about really education rocks the nation, right? Communication rocks the nation. So who's our sponsor for this week? We got one?
You could say movement professional, Dr. Chris
Live. Yeah. Dr. Chris Live, sponsor for today.
Yep.
Thank you for the workshop, Coach. And we're excited for more of those. So, all right, guys, that's it. Episode 6 here, talking about movement habits to apply. All right, if you haven't already started to apply with us at the gym. So, see you next time. All right, we got a guest member coming up next week. So, stay tuned for it. All right.
See you then.